This week we skip ahead in your text to chapters 18 and 19. Chapter 18 on action research and chapter 19 evaluation research. And I skip ahead for two reasons. Reason number one is that action research and evaluation research are very typical types of research that you see inside of educational research. It's the type of research that gets brought forward for us to make different changes related to programming and curriculum. When I say programming, I mean like different types of programs that come into your school, or some of those response to intervention kinds of programs that you see to change behavior among students. And so I bring that early on because as we read the bulk of the text, we start looking at different methods, we start looking at statistical tools. It puts some context to what type of research is this, action or evaluation or basic research. In addition, you will have a final paper for this course, and you'll have option A where you will critique research research articles, and they may be quantitative or qualitative or evaluative types of research articles that you will write a critique about, and that's option A. And then option B, you can choose to write a proposal for doing either an action research project yourself or doing an evaluation research project as part of that option B. And those two, if you have some additional coursework, you're new in the program and you want to do an independent study for 3 credits, you can take the plan created in this course and then use that plan and execute it, execute your own action research, execute your own evaluation plan for credit for ASTE 6900, which is an independent study. So I'm sort of beginning with the end in mind here so you can see what it looks like and to put some context to the different type of methodologies you're going to see throughout the bulk of the chapters, chapters 3 through 18 essentially. So this is going to be kind of I'm going to do 2 separate videos, one for chapter 18 and one for chapter 19, just to break it up a little bit so you can see the differences in the types of research methodologies and then be thinking. You don't have to decide, I don't think you have to decide clear to week 11 about what you're going to do, option A or option B. But at least it'll give you ways to think about as you're going through chapters 3, 4, 5, and so on about what you might want to do. So without further ado, then we'll take a look at the objectives for this week. There's only 2 objectives for a lot of text that we're going to be covering, but they're kind of the broad stroke things here. So explain the difference between an espoused theory and a theory in action and why these concepts are useful for improving professional practice. This is super important, and it is discussed in chapter 18, our espoused theory, what we think is happening, and then the theory in action, what is really happening. And they have really good examples, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. The second objective for us this week is to explain how action research and evaluation research can be used to investigate and solve educational problems. And that's just to get you, again, not only looking at the problems of practice in the chapters, but thinking about your own problems of practice that you see in your situation. Begin to think about how you could change that, or in the case of getting credit towards your graduation degree, how you can formulate that into a separate project through option B of the final paper in this project, in this course. So my video will appear here, and then there's this fun overview about how research is like cooking. You'll have discussion and just quiz here. And then some of you have already jumped ahead and done the city training. Great. This is explained. It's not due to the end of the month. But let me just pause here and say, before you can conduct any research especially with students and actually even with adults, if you're doing research in a formal setting such as a school district or a university, you need this training to understand what you can and can't do with human subjects. And so this is being required. You'll see this pop up as something you should be working on. But you essentially go to the modules that are linked on this. I'll take a quick look right here. We'll jump into it. But it outlines what you need to do to get this city certification. And those of you in the MS program and you're going to be doing a thesis, this is required. You can't actually conduct your research without having this certification. And most school districts want you to have some, if you're going to be especially doing research with students, they want you to be aware of what is acceptable type of research with human subjects. So if you have any questions about this certification procedures, let me know, but it's pretty well spelled out here, and I don't want to reread this or go over this right now and rehash what I think is fairly clear, and want to get on to the content of chapter 18 and 19. But do keep in mind that this is a certification to make sure that you understand what is permissible and the ways to treat human subjects when we're doing research, whether it's action within our own classroom or evaluating a separate program and measuring student outcomes. This is an important understanding for so that you don't make a mistake, find yourself in a courtroom or defending yourself in some other way, or losing your job because of the type of research that you did. So this is an important certification for you to go through. All right, let's move on then to chapter 18, action research. And I've highlighted a few things here. I believe, as I've mentioned before, that problems of practice at the beginning of each chapter is something, there's at least one or two or more things that are bulleted in this section that you can relate to in your own teaching. And I've highlighted a few that I want to just provide some examples for, especially in career and technical education. The first one that I have highlighted here are what interventions can teachers use to reduce the incidence of bullying among their students? Enough said. I think we've all had some experiences with bullying, whether we have witnessed it face to face or we hear about it coming back from some other way, back channel to us through some other way. And oftentimes we are really dealing with some things going on with social networks that are really take a long time to dog down. But what interventions can teachers use? And I'm sure maybe your school has tried some different types of interventions. Maybe they're not working, and maybe you propose some sort of action research in your school based on other research studies that you've read to make a difference. The second one I have highlighted here, and like I said, some of these might relate to you, but I just pulled a few out. How can teachers improve middle school students' learning and motivation in performance-based courses like industrial arts? Well, this should resonate with some of you, especially industrial arts or technology engineering or family and consumer science or whatever it might be. How can we improve their learning and motivation in those areas? And there's quite a body of research in this area and action research that can be done in your own classroom. Third bullet here that I've highlighted, should teachers assign homework to be done over the holiday breaks for school, or should homework be assigned, period? One of you mentioned in your introduction to each other that you were really interested in this idea about homework. There is some very good research that says homework, when done and when it is constructive and when it is not repetitive and really addresses problems that uses the skills discussed in class, works. But if students don't do it, it's impossible for it to work. Anyway, I digress. That might be a topic that some of you really are interested in. Okay, so those are the problems of practice that you take a look at. Important ideas. And this one, I always have a difficulty deciding what's more important than the others, and I get a little heavy-handed with my highlight marker. But I've marked I've marked these because there's a reason for me and a comment I want to make about each one of these. Action research is more closely tied to the educator's practice than our other types of research, and they mean basic research, which we've already talked about. It gives it a unique potential to solve problems of practice. You are the clinician. You are in that setting. You have a specific population. They bring a certain demographic. And because you have that almost case study, you can make tweaks that are going to actually be very meaningful in your classroom. And it may not even be possible for you to take other studies and generalize to your situation and make that difference. Again, one of you mentioned this in your introduction that, we get, these types of studies is something that worked in another school and we're going to do it here too. And you're like, wait a minute, that school does not look like us. Those students don't look like my students. And then we're surprised when the result is not the same. So I think that that's a really good area for an important idea, important takeaway. Second bullet here, educators can carry out action research projects from various purposes, including personal, professional, and political purposes. Yeah, and it may be something that's really important to your school or your school district, especially if they're trying to do a very large project and you suggest, wait a minute, how about we just do a research project? I'll make it an action research project in my classroom, and that might save a lot of expense and time. Systematic data collection, analysis, and reflection distinguishes action research from educators and other approaches to problem solving. And that's true I'm asking a quiz question about that, I believe, about how this differs from just going to a conference and getting an idea, and how we look at systematically collecting that data so that we have some real evidence that's not as open to bias or opinion to think about, yeah, I should do that project or not. So I think the systematic data conversation in this chapter, again, is really important. All right, now you see it, the heavy-handed highlighter. Idea number 5 here, important ideas. A well-done research action project gives educators both an increased understanding of new practices and empirical data about the effects of those practices on teaching and learning in real life. And so what we mean by this, again, goes back to that one above where it talks about systematic research, where you have real evidence. You have created maybe something that is not so biased. You've actually selected a control group so you can see the actual effect rather than just said generically, well, I did this in my class and it appeared to work because their scores went higher. But you don't really have an idea of their gains. You don't really have an idea of whether it was statistically significant or if it was just a few points. And arguably a few points is still important, but is it significant enough to make some sort of change or adopt a new practice? Those are the types of empirical data, and it's related to that systematic research. Item 6, action research benefits educators by improving theories of educational practice, their work with students, and their interactions with colleagues and educational stakeholders. And this is really important, especially in CTE, where we rely a lot on stakeholders because the funding in CTE and funding in education in general for academic courses, nobody's really going to argue whether or not, reading, writing, and arithmetic are important skills. That's pretty much been supported historically throughout our whole public education history. But when you're looking at career and technical education courses and you're deciding, does that career and technical education area meet the needs, job demands, manpower needs, career education, college preparation types of things? There's a lot of questions around that type of funding, and it's much more discretionary, if you will, and also used as a political football moved around. And so evidence that's based on theory for what's really happening to provide to your stakeholders is extremely important. Item 7, by following the principles of action science, educators can identify and address discrepancies in their espoused beliefs, what you think is going on, what you're maybe even certain is going on, and relate that to the actual behavior. And they talk about looking at your micro teaching and observations, maybe observations by others and recording what's going on, because sometimes we really are certain we are asking questions that are higher order, when in fact we're really not. When we actually take a look at our video, or we have somebody record, the actual questions, or maybe it's a practice of calling on a different gender. There's been some studies that say teachers will tend to ask different types of questions to females versus males. Maybe we just don't really know what it is. We have an espoused theory about what we think we're doing, but we're really not doing it. Item 8, action research is carried out primarily by educators with an insider perspective on problems of practice. Yes, and that can lead to some bias, but outsiders can help in designing the study, addressing insiders' feelings about the researcher problem, but contributing and supporting for personal and social change. And I think that this is a good reason to collaborate with outsiders, maybe at a university, maybe at a different institution, maybe in a different department, maybe somebody at your district office, because it'll add that other point of view where you might have that blind spot, that research blind spot, and also bias that you're bringing to what it is that you're trying to assess. Action researchers can use a number of validity criteria to help them design research to achieve maximum credibility and trustworthiness. And this goes back to having some real evidence, not someone's opinion, not something, well, we increased our stats, we increased our percentage by this. And yes, it's an increase, but is it statistically significant? It just adds that step-by-step credibility to what it is that you're trying to say with some actual evidence. All right, key terms. I didn't go highlighter crazy here, but obviously, and I think most of you know this, understanding the vocabulary is really a way to understand content. What I like about your text is it does use the key term, and it's bolded, and then it discusses really what the definition of that term is. So all of these are important terms, and as you look at them, I would scan them, as I've mentioned, and then pull them out as you're reading. But I'm just going to digress on this first one because it's what the whole chapter is about. And that's action research is a form of research carried out by educators in their everyday work setting for the primary purpose of improving professional practice. Many of you commented in your introductions that this is what you hoped you would get from this class: how to do better research with your students, not just imparting to them how to do research, but with your students, how to inform your teaching so that you can be better. And then the other side of that was many of you commented about how you would like to be able to evaluate research so that when the next great thing comes down the pike, and I think one of you mentioned that it might be repackaged in some other way, that you are really able to see through what that research is and ask some really informed critical thinking types of questions. So these bolded terms are real important, and I think you need to pay attention to those. One last thing here in this section, there are two more things I guess I want you to take a look at here, and one is table 18.1. And it discusses this in the text, but really take a look at the differences here between a formal research and an action research. What's different in the purpose? In this case, it's solving a local problem of practice. And then here, the formal research produces more generalizable knowledge. It's the focus of the study is the problem or goal related to one's own practice. In this chapter, they also talk about participatory research. That means that you're a participant in the research. And they give you an example, the Silkus example of where he's an industrial arts teacher and he's participating right inside of it. You can do an action research project and be slightly outside, but for the most part, those terms, participatory and action research, can be used almost interchangeably. Sometimes you'll see the term applied research, and that usually means that it's a very practical type of research, but you are in that case not always participating. So that's another term that you might see used not in this text, but in some other texts. Focus of the study, topics of selection, researcher characteristics. Just take a look and read through these items to have a good idea about how this differs. I'm going to jump down here to this one, research method. It's easily implemented. Procedures are emergent design. It's short frame. Here it's more rigorous. Design controls long time frame. And I might say larger sample size. Sample, sample, sample. In fact, go up here to the top, random representative sample from a defined population. Here we're looking more at a convenient sample, usually your one's own clients or students. This is a huge difference. And again, when you're looking at research, man, I look at the sample I look at biases by the researchers. I look at the research questions. But before I even go to their methodology or anything, I'm like, what sample did they use? Can I generalize? Is it representative of an entire population? And would this sample of 8th graders in a remote village in Africa, okay, that's extreme example, relate to my students here in a suburb with a school size of 1,800 and a socioeconomic status that does not even compare. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about with the population. So do take a look closely at that table. Last item in this one, I'm going to jump down here. This section, and it talks about how action research differs from educators' other approaches to solving problems. And this statement, typically teachers talk to colleagues, attend workshops, pick up ideas from professional magazines, or rely on their own hunches to guide or trying something new in their practice. This goes back to this important idea. The question is asked, do the ideas derived from these approaches actually affect student learning? And then I want you to really think about, this is our modus of operandi, and then how you can formalize and do just a little bit better to have more evidence in your teaching or in your action research projects to really move the needle, inform your teaching, and then make a difference. And maybe share those results with others who have a similar population or demographic that they're working with. So those are some of the highlights in Chapter 18, some of the takeaway messages related to action research. I hope that some of you will choose to do this type of a final paper, because I think it's a really good way to kind of formalize and reflect on what it is that you would like to do in your own classroom. And then for those of you who want to earn an independent study credit, it's an easy way to get the proposal part done and then be able to execute in the semester that you would like to take that credit. So those are my overview comments for Chapter 18. I will be moving on now to Chapter 19.